The English language came to India in a curious way, not through a gradual process of cultural osmosis like Urdu, Persian or Arabic, but riding piggyback on the British Empire. To keep their hold over the jewel in their crown, the British had come up with an official master plan called Macaulay's Minute in 1835. Thomas Macaulay's idea was to create schools and colleges which would groom a class of Indians in the ways and values of the British so that they might link the rulers to the ruled. Thus began English education in India. A tool of empire which would become an irrevocable cultural influence. In 1937, the well-known writer Raja Rao asked the basic question at the root of all Indian writing in English. How does one convey in a language that is not one's own the spirit that is one's own? It is a question successive generations of Indian writers have conclusively laid to rest. With great mastery and conviction, they have taken an alien language of conquest and made it their own.
Morbid? Surely, said one of them, an agonizer even by donkey standards, we should understand life first.
In fact, over the last 20 years, a slew of writers have been wooed and fated by their former colonists as master users of English, once a language not their own.
But there's a recognition now that there is much more here to be tapped. Not necessarily exploited in a traditional colonialist way, but tapped into anyway. And I think people are looking more and more towards India for the talent of the future.
On October the 14th, 1997, when Arundhati Roy stood up in the Guildhall in London to accept the Booker Prize, she became the first resident Indian to win Britain's most coveted literary award. The only other Indians to win it, V.S. Naipaul and Salman Rushdie, were expatriates. In that thrilling moment, India was stamped as the most fertile new literary ground in international eyes. £1 million in advances, over 40 weeks on the Sunday Times and New York Times bestseller lists, over 2 million copies sold worldwide, The God of Small Things, an intense and personal story of childhood and doomed love set in a small town in Kerala, made no allowances for a foreign audience. Yet wild international excitement greeted the book, clinching evidence that Indian writing in English had come into its own. Such was the excitement that Giles Gordon, best known in India as the agent for Vikram Seth's A Suitable Boy, says that after Arundhati Roy's success, foreign publishers nudged each other at the Frankfurt Book Fair asking, "Do you have an Indian book we can publish? We don't care how good it is, we just want it to be Indian." The excitement was exceptional, but Arundhati Roy is only the latest arrival in the distinguished field of Indian writing in English. A spectacular line of writers have ploughed the ground before her. V.S. Naipaul, best known for his masterpiece A House for Mr. Biswas, was the first writer to make the great leap to prove that neither poverty nor his obscure beginnings as the descendant of indentured labor and far-off Trinidad could stop him from becoming one of the greatest masters of the English language. Journeying to Oxford at 18, burning with the ambition to be a writer, Naipaul had to wrestle with deep personal despair and a hostile environment in England. But nothing could stop the flow of his pen. Novels, short stories, essays, travelogues, he mastered them all, writing with passion and authority on subjects ranging from life in the small island colonies of Trinidad and Tobago to cultural fundamentalism and Islam. Today, 23 books later, Naipaul is considered one of the greatest living writers in the English language. The British establishment has honoured him with a knighthood, and Oxford University with an honorary doctorate. But that is recent history. In the 1950s, when The Mystic Masseur was published, Sir Naipaul's work was scorned as a little savoury from the colonies, and his masterpiece, The House for Mr. Biswas, was greeted with indifference. While Naipaul was raising the stakes of Indian writing abroad, back home in India, the genre found its pillars in writers like R.K. Narayan and Mulkraj Anand. Unlike Naipaul, these writers wrote only on Indian themes, but their styles were strictly British. Of course, they used English excellently, but it was still a borrowed tongue, and they did not presume to play with it. With their books, however, the small-town chatter, the rituals and superstitions, which had earlier only been subjects fit for colonial caricature, sprang to life. First championed by Graham Greene, R.K. Narayan created Malgudi, his unforgettably charming fictional town, peopled by ordinary characters and small happenings. Narayan's gentle humour and deep insights into human character soon made him a much-loved writer all over the world. His books, A Bachelor of Arts and Swami and Friends, still retain a timeless quality about them and remain a must-read for literature lovers decades after they were written. While Narayan's books radiated a sunny, humorous quality, Mulkraj Anand, who incidentally was part of the Bloomsbury Circle, wrote movingly about oppressed people in books like Coolie and Untouchable. But it was another writer, the literary stalwart Raja Rao, who was the first writer in the 1920s and 30s to break literary convention by experimenting with form. Though Rao lived in France and later in the US, one question nagged him. How were Indian writers to infuse English expression with the tempo and cadence of Indian life? In his seminal book, Kanthapura, the story of how the Gandhian struggle for independence comes to a small village in South India, Rao uses ancient oral traditions to achieve this end.
We in India think quickly. We talk quickly, and when we move quickly. There must be something in the son of India that makes us rush and tumble and run on. And our paths are paths interminable. The Mahabharata has 214,778 verses, and the Ramayana 48,000. Purans there are endless and numerous. We have neither punctuation nor the treacherous ats and ons to bother us. We tell one interminable tale. Episode follows episode, and when our thought stops, our breath stops, and we move on to another thought. This was, and still is, the ordinary style of our storytelling. I've tried to follow it myself in this story. Raja Rao, Forward to Kanthapura, Menton, November 1937.
Rao's interminable tale won applause for its innovation, but readers found him dense and difficult to read. Despite Rao's efforts, Indian writers in the first half of the century were essentially social realists. They wrote within the British grammar school tradition, and though they wrote excellently, they could not imagine bending the rules. At the same time, there were a few fine writers between the 60s and 80s who, in a sense, kept tending the Indian English flower beds, preparing them for the flowering that was to come in the late 80s. Prominent among them were Anita Desai, Nainapal Saigal and Khushwant Singh. Desai, whose book In Custody was shortlisted for the Booker, developed a signature style of quiet grace, her writing centering on the universal themes of human love and loss. Nainapal Saigal, on the other hand, wrote intensely political books, an inevitable legacy of her proximity to power as niece of Jawaharlal Nehru and daughter of Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, a family lineage to which her autobiography, Prison and Chocolate Cake, is a tribute. Though now mostly out of print, Nainapal's books were unique in that she was perhaps the only writer to center her writing on the freedom struggle, the thrill of government formation in independent India, and the great betrayal of Indira Gandhi's emergency declaration. Writing a decade before Saigal was Khushwant Singh. Well before he became the colorful and irreverent man of public life, Khushwant went through years of artistic struggle with his muse, producing a minor masterpiece in 1954. His novel, A Train to Pakistan, is a love story that captures the horrors and irrationalities of partition. As a novelist, Khushwant was never again to match his stunning debut. The one writer who did, around the same time, was Nirad C. Chowdhury. At the age of 52, he published an astounding book on the Indo-English encounter, the autobiography of an unknown Indian. Erudite, wide-ranging, written with peerless bite and gravity, the book was hailed as an instant classic. But whether writing about Hinduism in the Vedic ages dressed in bowler hat and coattails, or immersed in a copy of Homer sporting a dhoti, Nirad Babu's opinions were always controversial. The dedication of his book provides a clue.
To the memory of the British Empire in India, which conferred subjecthood on us, but withheld citizenship, to which yet every one of us threw out a challenge. Civis Britannicus sum, because all that was good and living within us was made, shaped, and quickened by the same British rule.
Now living in Oxford, still very sharp if a trifle cantankerous, Nirad Chowdhury marked his 100th birth anniversary with a final elegy to the Raj, the three horsemen of the new apocalypse. Despite his provocative debut, Indian writing in English had to move away from the stiff style of Nirad Babu's work and the accomplished but uninventive styles of Anita Desai, Khushwant Singh, and Nainapal Saigal. It was high time Indian writing in English grew out of the shadow of the Raj and created a distinctive voice of its own. The answer came in 1981, in a far more dramatic fashion than anyone could have anticipated, courtesy an anonymous part-time copywriter living in London. Salman Rushdie's magnum opus, Midnight's Children, won the Booker Prize in 1981 and electrified the English-speaking world. Rushdie was inspired by a little-known classic written in 1948, G.V. Desani's All About H. Hatter. The leaping, puzzling prose in this book was a pioneering effort, the first genuine move to make English an Indian language. Strangely, though literary heavyweights T.S. Eliot and Anthony Burgess championed it, Desani's All About H. Hatter fell into complete anonymity. It was left to Rushdie's Midnight's Children, written 30 years later, to change the face of Indian writing. Rushdie's exuberant, unconventional style and chutneyfied English accomplished what Raja Rao had set out to do. It infused English expression with the tempo and cadence of Indian life. Here was a whole new vocabulary. Characters could speak in the colorful grammar of their real counterparts. You're frowning your head, not believing me? Then I'll give you one tight chapat. with Midnight's Children and books like Shame and The Moor's Last Sigh, slang, Hinglish, every kind of pidgin became legitimate literary expression. Indian writing in English had captured the amazing mix of languages, the potpourri of cultures characteristic of India. English was no longer the inherited tool of empire. The Rushdie effect was spectacular. Within years, dozens of highly accomplished Indian writers sprang up, earning international kudos. The first of these was Amitav Ghosh. Critics excitedly compared his first novel, The Circle of Reason, with the great classic picaresques, Tom Jones and Don Quixote. The books that followed, Shadow Lines, a love story which switches between Calcutta and London, In an Antique Land, a non-fictional study of Egypt and India, and The Calcutta Chromosome, a sci-fi detective novel, cemented Ghosh's name as a first-rate writer of international repute.
The two ladies, one the wife of an ear, nose and throat specialist, one the wife of an important middleman in the shoe trade, looked at each other in exasperated resignation at the ways of men.
Another Indian writer who had the Western world bowing to his sheer talent in the 1980s was Vikram Seth. In a display of amazing virtuosity, Seth wrote a 307-page novel in perfectly crafted Elizabethan sonnets. Set in San Francisco, The Golden Gate received immense critical acclaim and became an instant international bestseller. Completely different in style but equally accomplished, Seth's second novel, A Suitable Boy, placed him firmly as a front-runner in the recognized canon. Written as a novel of manners centering on the Indian middle class's preoccupation with marriage, A Suitable Boy is the longest novel to have been written this century. Seth's eye for social detail and his charming and naturalistic prose has had critics comparing him with the great 19th century British writer Jane Austen. While these writers were tasting the heady wine of success, tucked away out of the metropolitan eye in small-town Lucknow and faraway New Zealand, Allan Sealy sat writing his first novel, The Trottanama. Sealy's extravagant and inspired book, spanning 7 generations of an Anglo-Indian family, tossed language with the same path-breaking ease and inventiveness as Rushdie, but it had little commercial success. Undeterred, Sealy continued to write. His fourth book, The Everest Hotel, a warm and graceful novel set in a small hill town, was summoned by the 1998 Booker Prize Committee for a nomination. Fame and fortune might have been slow in catching up with Allan Sealy, but the last 2 decades have seen several Indian writers sip from the cup of instant success. Shashi Tharoor's The Great Indian Novel, Rukun Advani's Beethoven Among the Cows, Mukul Kesavan's Looking Through Glass, Rohinton Mistri's Such a Long Journey, Amit Chowdhury's Afternoon Raga, Kiran Nagarkar's Cuckold, Firdaus Kanga's Trying to Grow, and Upamanyu Chatterjee's English August head that list, but do not exhaust it. Following quick on each other's heels, these writers have given Indian writing in English a lively and vivid identity. Curiously, 6 of the significant writers to come up in the 80s and 90s, Allan Sealy, Amitav Ghosh, Upamanyu Chatterjee, Shashi Tharoor, Rukun Advani, and Mukul Kesavan, were cropped from the same alma mater, St. Stephen's College in Delhi. Though they are all from varied vocations, Sealy and Ghosh are full-time writers, Chatterjee is a bureaucrat, Tharoor a diplomat, Advani a publisher, and Kesavan a lecturer, few can miss the irony that some of the finest and most iconoclastic of Indian writing in English should have come out of this prized bastion of the British system. Despite its talented peerage, Upamanyu Chatterjee's novel English August stands out amongst the others. A bureaucrat himself, in English August, Chatterjee takes a searingly honest and irreverent look at the pettiness and tedium of Indian bureaucratic life, and the unbridgeable gap between the elite English-educated urbanite and the rest of the country. Writing with verve, humour, and a cynical truthfulness, Upamanyu Chatterjee captured the voice of a generation in English August, and the novel has grown into something of a mini cult.
Then the rains came to Madna. There had been a heaviness in the air for a few days. The electricity had gone off often. It always does before the rains, Vasant had said wisely. He had sky-watched in the morning and announced oracularly, "It will rain today." One more hot afternoon, Agastya was naked in bed, lazily wondering if he had sunstroke. Suddenly a roar and a drum roll as of a distant war. He took a few seconds to place the sound. Then he was off the bed and fumbling with a lungi and kurta, and not being able to tie the lungi, and getting his head and arms stuck in the kurta because of his haste. He rushed out. Outside, there was nothing but rain.
Though by the 70s, Indian writers had demonstrated their mastery of the English language, they were still in search of ways to throw off the muffling cloak of empire. It needed Rushdie and his brand of magic realism to unfetter it completely. Inspired by the work of Latin American writers like Gabriel Garcia Marquez and the long-forgotten Desai, Salman Rushdie was the first Indian writer to use magic realism. Influenced by him, many Indian writers began to wield magic realism like a wand to conjure the layered complexities of subcontinental life. For example, in Mukul Kesavan's Looking Through Glass, one of the characters in the book is suddenly turned into a frozen cardboard figure pasted onto the sides of a passing bus. Here Kesavan uses magic realism to suggest the bewildering paralysis of communal unrest in the 1940s, the period in which the story is located. There are other interesting ways in which Indian writers have tried to Indianize the novel. For centuries, British colonial writers had painted India and its natives as grotesque caricatures in their stories, painted in fantastic and exotic colors, ridiculous erratic beings against which the colonizer could contrast himself and find himself superior. This was one way in which the colonizers and the British Empire could overcome their anxiety about being in a different and strange world. As a sort of counter to the unfairness of this representation, Indian writers now often use the same devices which were earlier ridiculed. Myths, folk-tale traditions like the Jataka and Panchatantra, pidgin English, superstitions and religious cultural allusions have become common in their works. In Vikram Chandra's Red Earth and Pouring Rain, for example, the gods Hanuman, Ganesha and Yama descend on an Indian city to vie for the soul of a wounded monkey. A bargain is struck. The monkey must tell a story. If he can keep his audience entertained, he shall live. Meant to explore the story within a story tradition found in the Mahabharata and Kathasarit Sagar, Red Earth and Pouring Rain faces an ironic fallout. Books like these are often attacked by critics for falling into the trap of being exotic, perfectly flavored menu for a Western audience, instead of being steps towards the creation of a truly genuine and authentic Indian voice. Geeta Hariharan, whose debut novel, The Thousand Faces of Night, won the Commonwealth Prize for Best First Book, is another writer who makes skillful use of myths and folktale traditions in her work, and fiercely resists the idea that her writing is slanted to suit a Western audience. In The Thousand Faces of Night, a story about the intertwining lives of three women and their search for fulfillment, Hariharan shades her characters with references to different archetypal goddesses to layer her narrative. In her second novel, The Ghosts of Vasu Master, she explores the use of parables and modern-day versions of the Jataka tales. Offsetting the magic realists, the fabulists, and the linguistic play of her contemporaries is Shashi Deshpande. A significant punctuation in the story of Indian writing in English, Deshpande, like Vikram Seth, is of the naturalistic school. Writing over 2 decades, she has sketched with sensitive detail the conflicts and inner lives of urban middle-class women, and her books have a committed readership at home. Not quite in the same vein, but something of a social realist herself, is Shobha De, the unrivaled empress of Indian pulp fiction. Reviled and loved in equal measure, Shobha De has placed the lives and scandals of the rich and famous of Mumbai on the literary map with inimitable zest, and some would say panache. De's first few books, Socialite Evenings and Sisters, scandalized polite society. But De has become increasingly popular, and her books have even wound their way into some prescribed literary courses abroad. Though talented and versatile, Indian writers in English often face criticism at home for being too cosmopolitan and unrooted, for living abroad and writing in nostalgic and exotic ways about Indian realities. While it may still be negotiating its terms of acceptance on home turf, Indian writing in English has caught Western literary imagination. India, in fact, is quite the vogue abroad. The 50th anniversary celebrations of India's independence saw major Western literary journals like The New Yorker and Granta carry special issues on Indian writers in English. Once imported to India by the British Empire as a baton of power, English has stayed, slowly metamorphosing into an indigenous and colloquially vibrant Indian tongue. Orchestrated by literary stalwarts like Naipaul, Salman Rushdie, Vikram Seth, Amitav Ghosh, and Arundhati Roy, to name only a few, and embellished by fresh voices like Kiran Desai and Ardashir Vakil, who are sprouting every day, it seems that the East is finally imposing itself on the West. As the 1990s wind to a close and the millennium approaches, the empire is writing back and beyond in strident and confident tones.